This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Hing.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Transformation with Tara Sutphen. Tara Sutphen is the author of Blame It on Your Past Lives and Soul Agreements. 3 audio CD series, metaphysical meditations, sourcing series, and sleep programming. Tara has also collaborated with Emmy Award-winning Shane Stanley and Marla Maples on numerous DVDs. Tara Sutphen is a master in the psychic sciences. If you'd like to find out more about Tara's work, upcoming seminars, and meditations to help you fulfill your dreams, visit her website at tarasutphen.com.
Hello, and welcome to Transformations with Tara Sutphen. I am subbing for Tara today. I am her brother, Jason McKean. And I've done this before, and I have a lot of fun subbing for Tara's show. She has a lot of cool people that I've talked to in the past, a lot of great guests that she has set me up with. And today I wanted to talk with my good friend Christain Matheson because we haven't talked on air for it's been quite a while now, like a year or so, and I wanted to find out what's kind of new in his realm. Richard is a novelist, a screenwriter, a producer. He has worked with everyone in the business, and I mean everyone. And also an incredible musician as well, a drummer, fantastic drummer. We've done albums together and continue to do albums together. Christain Matheson, welcome to Transformations.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. And
I'm actually Tara Sutphen disguising myself just to do a secret quality check on the program.
So you've transformed yourself, right? That's the
yeah.
The greatest transformation of all is to transform ourselves into Tara Sutphen.
I'll actually be several people during the interview, so I'll be switching here and there.
So I'm glad that you're up at this morning because I know you have. Are they called Hollywood hours? You know,
yeah, they're called Vegas stripper hours. That's kind of the sleep patterns that I have perfected. When I grew up, my mother and father would always be watching TV until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They'd be watching movies. I mean, the house operated. It really had operated like a casino, like a Nevada casino. So the idea of going to sleep. I guess there's people that actually go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. I don't know who they are. Like
I have no idea who they are.
Yeah, I don't know who they are. I think they've got to be more alert than we are.
I think my brother would do that. He would host a radio show in the morning, from 4 o'clock or something like that. I think he would go to bed at 8 o'clock, but it's just not natural.
Well, we used to have a milkman. There used to actually be people called milkmen who would actually bring milk to your home, in trucks, and he was always touting the great wisdom of getting lots of sleep. So he was very peppy. He was a very peppy milkman.
Well, at 8 in the morning, but 8 at night, he was ready to fall off.
Yeah,
right?
I wasn't really ready to have a peppy exchange about milk at 8 o'clock in the morning, but that may change. That could change any minute now.
So, in those hours, those wee hours of the morning, there you are working feverishly on writing scripts. I know you have a new book that is coming out. It's been threatening to come out for a while, and you are someone who likes to just put every ounce of effort and in yourself and just make sure that it's right. And that new book is called Zoopraxis.
Yes, unfortunately, you have been my great ally in designing the cover. So we share a sort of a love of specificity, and we share an eternal patience
Mm-hmm.
with going in and improving all the aspects of it. It doesn't seem to daunt either one of us. But that book will be 22 new stories, and there's some beautiful illustrations by a remarkably talented artist named Harry O. Morris, who's done my other books,
Mm-hmm.
who you know. We've all hung out together. And I think there's about maybe 17 of those. So the whole thing should be really, very impactful. And I thank you for all the help you've given me with the cover. It looks just beautiful.
Absolutely. It's a whole package, right? It's like when with books, which are, with the digital revolution and all, it's like books are becoming more or less expendable, right? You can get your information just from your phone. You just reading stuff, but that package of a book where you have the cover, which sets the mood for it, right? And then you open it up, and it's that tactile sensation of turning the page and continuing on in the journey.
Yeah, as opposed to pressing the Kindle button, and watching the imaginary pages moving. But I think we've done I don't know how many books we've done together now. Maybe 3, maybe 4 even, plus album covers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people know you as being such a remarkable tarot reader, but a lot of them may not know also that you've got this gift as a graphic designer, which is really stellar.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's I feel that creativity it comes from the same source, and however you choose to express it, whether it's through music, art, writing, interpretive dance. It's like it comes from
naked Pilates. I call it naked Pilates to me.
Well, that may be your, what you're doing at 6 a.m. there.
Yes.
After being up all night writing. But
yes.
I think it all comes from that same creative source that we pull from.
I completely agree with you. I was doing some drum tracks the other day for our friend P.G. Sturgis.
Yes.
And we're putting an album together, sort of like a lot of like very cool blues songs. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And I was in the studio and I had my headphones on, and when they say okay go, and the song starts, the feeling to me was almost identical to the feeling I have when I started writing. It was that same sense that all these different internal energies and patterns are seeking form, and they're beginning to emerge. And it was I would say, if you'd handed me a pen and paper, the same impulse would have been in that moment. So I completely agree with you. I think it's interesting how many people we know who have multiple creative talents, but they seem to stem from the same. I feel like it's an inner expression of patterns, an inner expression of not just perceptions, but patterns that you find, patterns along the way, patterns that come from your emotional journey, your human journey, and patterns and ideas begin to take shape, and they can express themselves in my case as a drummer, with rhythms, or with prose, or script writing, or whatever it happens to be.
Do you feel that that there is a different sense of pressure when because when you're writing, that is like usually a solitary activity, right? It's like no one is standing over you going, okay, and begin, but when you're playing music and all that, it's like there's a different sense of pressure to kind of keep it together, to edit yourself. I mean, you've been playing for 50 years? I mean, or so. Yeah. So it's like you have it down, as far as
if not by now, I should take up the flute. I think I should move on. Take a
no,
clue.
you definitely have it down. You're an incredible drummer. It's like Ginger Baker was one of your teachers.
Yeah, he was. He was
back in the day.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's a very interesting question you're asking, because I just was talking about this yesterday with a friend of mine about the pressure that you're under when you're in a recording studio, and there are some musicians who are really superb, who get a little rattled by it. You couldn't panic, or otherwise you never would have made it as far as a recording studio. But there's a difference between being totally comfortable with it and being rattled, and it does feel a little bit like I think what actors feel right before they go on. There's a little bit of that kind of an awareness, and fortunately, because of the ease of recording now, you can do multiple takes, and it's not really a cost factor. It's more of a time factor than a cost factor.
Right.
But it is about pulling together all of these elements, all these patterns, all these feelings, all these choices, into something that feels congruous, or congruent, I should say, and something that's right for the song. Mm-hmm. And just being present, being supervisory about what you're doing, but also being completely in the moment, and letting go. And it's like you're asking almost contradictory things of yourself, or contrary things of yourself. And if you can do it, being in the studio is really a pleasure. If not, I think people really get uptight.
They get just rattled by the whole experience of what's called kind of red light fever, right? When it's just like, okay,
is that what they call it?
Yeah. As far as when that that record light pops on, then they freeze up, right? It's like they.
Yeah, they definitely do, and I can see why people do. And the higher the stakes are, as you're dealing with, more and more, more and more high-profile projects,
mm-hmm.
the stakes get higher. At least they feel like they're higher. But the trick is to realize that the act of what you're creating is the same whether you're doing it by yourself playing by yourself to a song, or you're in a very elaborate studio setting. But that's the trick. You have to kind of psych yourself out. You have to just sort of go, I'm not really here. I'm just in the song. All this other stuff is just window dressing. This is all just sort of way in the background. But you have to get used to it. It took me a while to figure out how to do that. So you have to. It's like going Zen, and I think people who give talks in public, who speak in front of large groups of people that appear in front of the camera. I've done a fair amount of that stuff, doing TV interviews and stuff like that, and it's very similar. You just have to kind of center yourself, and then when it comes to music, and at least with drumming, you have to make choices that are right for the song.
Right.
So
right.
So you're thinking a lot, and you're not thinking at all.
Do you have you ever been attracted to acting at all? Because it's like as a writer, as a screenwriter, it's like you're laying out the blueprint and all. And did you ever have the desire to be the vessel for how you totally envisioned what you had written, so that it was like kind of a precise interpretation?
I never did, and you would think I would have. Although I have done, as you know, we did it together. I've done some audio versions of my stories.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right, where I wrote it, and in a way, you have to perform it. But it has to sound natural. But you have to come at it, I think, the same way an actor would come at it.
Right.
And I never had the impulse to act or, to be in front of the camera. That was just not something that really intrigued me. I mean, and the only way I could really see it being comfortable would be if it was something that I wrote, because I would know exactly how I wanted it to be, which doesn't mean somebody couldn't do it better or come up with something that I hadn't seen in what I wrote, but at least I would feel comfortable in what I had done, that
Right.
I had conveyed pretty much what I had in mind. But I've never really walked down that path yet. I may try it. I mean, I've had people ask me to do stuff, people, it's usually they want me to be like a narcotics officer or something. Because I have a serious look about me, I always go, really? A narcotics officer? I don't know. Isn't there something a little bit more, effervescent?
Well, I don't see you like doing something kind of overt as opposed to psychological, right? As far as, I don't see you doing pratfalls and, physical comedy, and not that you're not capable of it,
Well, thank you.
but just, just kind of what all that entails, right? As opposed to something more serious.
Yeah, it would be more serious. I'm
psychological.
Sure, because that's what I write. Although I write a lot of comedy too, so I guess I could see doing that. But I've done the voiceover as a shrink for one of my short stories for a film that I directed called Arousal, and that was good, But I think voiceover would be really fun. I think that's really an interesting area, because you can just sort of vanish into the headphones and off you go. But how about you? Have you thought about acting? I mean, have you given that any?
I started out wanting to be an actor.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, because I was very theatrical. I loved costumes.
Okay.
As a kid, I would dress up if my brother was like in Little League or so, I would dress up in a baseball uniform. And if I didn't have one, I would make the uniform. I would, I probably looked really silly as a kid, kind of like, oh, isn't he cute? He wants to be a baseball player. I was 20. No, I was maybe 6, 7.
But so how would you describe? Because I know people, and we know people in common who are actors, or who certainly, that's their dream. That impulse, would you say, is the same as the impulse to do all the other things we've been talking about? Write or play an instrument or paint. I mean, are they all? Again, does it come from the same impulse? Because it's an interpretive art form.
I think that like with the things that we like, the entertainments, let's say, that we throw ourselves into, it's like there's a part for everyone, right? And it's like you need the screenwriter, you need the director, you need the actors, right? In order to complete the process, to share the ideas.
Right.
And so I feel that I was very interested in being part of that aspect of it. As I was okay with the one who memorized the lines and wore the costumes and played the part. Mm-hmm. As I grew older, I became less interested in playing someone else. I wanted to tap into an authentic personage for myself, right? And that started with music. I totally dropped acting and that the desire to do that. From being in like school plays and I'd be in operas there that my dad was in. He had placed me in some of those as well. And when I discovered music, that was an authentic expression where I could tell stories about what was going on inside of me, how I was feeling, and be able to again express it in a way that it was sharing with others.
And also to create it from scratch, really. I mean, with acting, you are interpreting. You're
completely.
Interpreting, and so it's which is not to make, any less of it. I mean, it's still an extraordinary talent to have, but it's a different talent. And, it's the difference between going into a recording studio and doing a drum track, or sitting at a piano and writing a song. I mean, they're different. They are all familial, but they are different. And I was thinking the thing that is also common to all of them, and particularly when you get to an aspect of performance, whether it's on stage, in a studio, in front of the camera, is that thing Denzel Washington always talked about in terms of how do you do it? And he said, I just get out of the way. And I think that's part of it. It's learning how to be centered in who you are and exactly what's going on creatively with you, and then also to get out of the way simultaneously. And it's when you think about it, I mean, to describe it that way, it seems like, well, how could you possibly do that? But there is a way to do that, and you go into that thing they used to call flow. Not the TV series, but the concept.
With Polly.
With Polly, whatever her name was. Polly won a cracker. But it's trancing out too.
Yeah.
Part of it is trancing out. It's the ability. I call it trancing out. The ability to just, you're in the room, but you're actually you've departed the physics of the room, and you're now into the creative thing.
There is a tarot card that I see that embodies exactly that state of flow, that what I would call that state where one loses / finds themselves.
Oh, there
right?
You go.
Where, and that's the Eight of Pentacles. It's usually depicted as a person who's sitting down, and they're carving out these pentacles. There's like 8 of them, but they're totally in a work state, and it's about being in the present. It's not about looking for the light at the end of the tunnel. It's about being the light in the tunnel.
Well, to do all this stuff in the way that we're talking about, to supervise all these things with these rhythms and these energies within oneself, and to creatively harness it, it's about being directive, kind of driving your own creative vehicle, and at the same time being completely spontaneously and effortlessly in the moment. And that, I think, is what presence is. Being present. I think that's what being present is. And I think it's hard for in modern life. I think being present is difficult. It's difficult. There's such a saturation of all these distracting things that it's hard for people to be present.
Right. Do you think it's more difficult to be a master of one thing in today's life, since we're called upon to master like so many things?
I think it's wise to master one thing before you move on to another thing. Because there is great balancing insight to be found in the mastering of one thing that can apply to the next thing. But if you try and do, I think the at least in the creative community of Los Angeles, when I meet with people who are a bit lost and they do a little bit of this and they do a little bit of that, they become they don't become a master of any of it, because there's no one thing that has taught them how to be present at a very deep level with one thing. So they're skimming, and you can do that. You can do a little bit of acting, a little bit of dancing, a little bit of interior decorating. I mean, anything you want to do. But the way I was raised with my father was, he was just a maestro as a writer. And that was, to me, that's the idea. Not that you shouldn't in a lifetime, you deny yourself absolutely nothing in terms of the creative pursuits that draw you in. But I think it's important to become really masterful at each one. And in a lifetime, I don't know how many you can master.
Right. For the listeners, your father, Richard Matheson, the author, the screenwriter, truly considered a master of the craft of writing. What are some of your favorite works of his?
Oh my God, there's so many to choose from. I was just thinking, being around my father, my whole life, it was also to be in the presence of a master is to appreciate how a master thinks, and they're always thinking about the thing that they are mastering. They're not thinking about other things. I mean, he wasn't thinking about directing. He wasn't thinking about acting. He wasn't thinking about pottery. He wasn't thinking about anything but writing. That was really the whole instinctive and immediate response that he had to ideas was how could they be best explored with his writing. But I mean, he did everything from Spielberg's debut film Duel, which is still an amazing piece of film, which was based on my father's short story, to I Am Legend, of course, is pretty iconic. Somewhere in Time, which we're exploring now actually as a musical. Real Steel, which was done a couple of years ago, which was based on an old Twilight Zone of his with Lee Marvin, which was actually based on a short story he wrote about a robot boxer.
Lots of Twilight Zone episodes.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is the one I think almost everybody remembers. With Shatner on the plane. And he also wrote some very intense and very tender, in many ways, westerns. He wrote this extraordinary book called Journal of the Gun Years about a young gunfighter who rises like a rock star to prominence and then is gone in this tiny window of time. And it's just a study of his hubris and a study of how he loses himself to his own glory. So very psychological, and The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is another one of my father's, very psychological. I mean, it's really about the losing of one's relevance, as a man. It's really about, what I guess Seinfeld would call shrinkage, But it's really about.
That's really profound, though. I mean, if one looks at it in a certain light, your sister has been posting a number of stills from that movie on his fan page there on Facebook, and where the guy is, he's like a little kid, right, sitting on a couch with this huge phone and a big pencil and all that, but. It's a when you put it in that light of one losing their relevance, right? And it's like an amazing like metaphor for
it's
modern
applicable
life
to
too.
a lot of things. It is, it's certainly relevant to health. It's relevant to age. I mean, I can remember meeting a woman who was. She was maybe in her 50s, and she was telling me, not in any sort of boasting way, but just sharing sort of the despair of it. That there was a time in her life when she would walk into a room and men would notice her, and now at this age, she said she felt invisible. She felt almost like this non-person on that level, and that's a kind of invisibility or a kind of reduction of value, if you will, that happens. And it's also, because it's in the book, in The Shrinking Man, it's in the form of the flesh. It's measured by the flesh. it's easier to sort of see what the indignities are. I mean, Alzheimer's is like that too. It's just, it's sort of, it's more metaphoric in a way.
It's that gradual diminishment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's what people fear about aging. In some cultures, there is a rise to mastery, to use that word again. There is an ascent toward absolute value, but in Western culture, it's the opposite.
You had said something really beautiful the other day, if I may share it. There, as far as growing up with a father who what was considered a master there, and it's like you said something about not growing up in his shadow, right? But in his sunlight.
Oh, yeah, that's how I feel. That's how I always felt, because of course, people when you are the child of a prominent person, and in my case, went into exactly the same field, and have the same first name. People are curious about what the whole experience was like. Was it difficult? Did it have an erasing effect? Was it confusing? There's a whole, and I understand the questions. I mean, I would have exactly the same questions about somebody who'd gone through that kind of an upbringing. But the truth of the matter was that, and of course, a question that occurs in people's mind is, was it difficult to grow up in his shadow? I mean, that's the question that almost inevitably people ask. And because of his regard for me, his regard for my writing, early on, not that I didn't have a massive journey ahead of me as a writer, but he recognized in me that I had whatever it is you have to have, those elements, the talent to be able to do it. And it's a lifelong journey of refinement and deepening. However, he was always there to be nurturing and give me very fair critiques about what I was doing. It was never anything but a guiding hand. And so in that sense, it was sunlight.
We hear so many times of the opposite, where the person who is famous, the person who is always wrestling, with, losing that, where they diminish those around them to prop themselves up and keep themselves top dog, right?
Absolutely, and that they cannot share, the limelight, the spotlight. It's a kind of a narcissism that is so toxic to children. I mean, I've known in Hollywood, I've known quite a few of them whose parents were well-known, well-known actor, well-known writer, director, musical star, and they were damaged. They were damaged by the neglect. They were damaged by the criticism of that parent, certainly if they tried to do the same thing. And the parent may have only been doing what they did to themselves. I mean, that parent, though they were a study in vanity and ego, their own internal process may have been extraordinarily self-critical, and they didn't know how to be nurturing toward them, to themselves or to others. My father, though he was self-critical, he was very fair to himself, and so he knew how to do that. You have to know how to do that for yourself before you can do it for somebody else. And a lot of famous people they don't get there because they take good care of themselves. They get there because they have a drive and a talent.
Yes. Do you think that that ability to kind of take care of yourself, that is kind of like one of the greater like lessons that both your parents have kind of passed on to you, as far as
it may be the greatest lesson, actually, when you think about it. If where you end up in life as an adult is that you have some great talent, that brings you great acclaim, but you have no sense of who you are, and you have no sense of how to be good to yourself, and how to not ultimately destroy yourself, sort of in this insidious way, slowly or quickly. Then really, what do you have? You have what you've manifested, but your internal self is imploding. And so I think the greatest value that a parent can pass on is how to appreciate who you are and how to look after yourself and not do things that are damaging to yourself.
When you're in your new collection there, Zoopraxis, which is an incredible book. I've had the fortune of being able to read it, as we've worked on the cover and tightening up everything. And
by the way, you're one of the maybe 3 or 4 people who have read it now.
Aha! So there, everyone else.
So I'm glad you like it, because if all 4 of them didn't like it, I'd be in it.
No, it's amazing, because you are such a wordsmith. You are a master craftsman in that, in that kind of time-honored tradition of someone who takes the language and just is a, knows how to evoke images, evoke feeling, right? In a very short space of pages there. You're seen by your peers as a master of compression, where you don't go on and on and on about describing the situation. It's just like, you get to the point, but in a way that one understands quickly.
I try to find, and it's, again, I could make the parallel with drumming. I could make the parallel with thinking, in a way, that it's about finding the crux. It's about being able to identify the crux and sort of put aside all of the distraction and the kind of the chatter of detail that doesn't really contribute. It doesn't really contribute. So being thorough, or as a friend of mine says, being about writing about the past, being historically accurate is not an entertainment value. So in the same way, I would say being thorough is not an entertainment value. And even, my mother's a shrink, as you know, and even in self-review and in trying to get to the heart of any situation, it's so important to look at everything, but also to have the kind of, it's like a centrifugal ability to pull everything to the center, and that becomes your crux. And with language, it's amazing how much you can do with a very brief amount of language. It's how you combine words. Words in unusual combinations can 2 or 3 words in an unusual combination really are much more impactful and, in their own weird way, thorough than a whole paragraph. They're very magical things, words, and they are not magical things simply strung together to form, a thought. They are thoughts unto themselves, and when you put them when you put them right next to one another, and you do it in a way that is compact and unusual, it's the effect is really it can be very explosive. Certainly, it's evocative, but it can be explosive.
Yeah, and it's like if it were not in the hands of such a master as yourself, and I say this because there's 22 stories in Zoopraxis, and it's not like, they all have the same like voice behind them, right? It's like what you do with these stories is they are entertaining, but they're also, they seek to keep pulling back the layers of the people that are well, I'm just going to say it. The people can be quite troubled, right? That the subjects of the stories, and
I think they all are. I think they're all wrestling with something. They're
yes,
wrestling with something that is perhaps imaginary. It doesn't matter, though. I mean,
it doesn't matter
no,
because if it is affecting them, then it's like that is what they're wrestling with. But it's like the way you approach it is like different in the styles that you write. But it's very, I mean, it's beautiful. It is troubling to, read. There's a, one story that I read that just kind of stayed with me. Just the feeling of it, and it was like, one of, I was looking for, ways of like helping that person, right? Afterwards, like, well, how could they just kind of, get out of that or whatever, because it's like, it's almost like if someone is just drowning in their own process, in their own, world there of what they're going through, it can, how do you pull that person back up, right? And I do you look for to leave people with in a way a possibility of like
there's a way out.
Yeah, like where it's that, like, that person may be lost, right? But for yourself, the reader, is there a way out?
Well, I always think there's a way out. It may not be the way you think, but I think there's always a way out. And of course, also because I'm writing a story, it has to have an ending that's somehow worthy of the character or worthy of the premise of the story. So I have to think of something that is, in some cases, that's what I call like a trapdoor ending.
Sure.
You think it's going to go this way, and it really doesn't. But it's still very, it still feels like it's exactly the right ending. Or it's something that just kind of is left to smolder, that it just continues to smolder, but you can see that there has been some kind of, there's been a journey. And it's not clear where it's going to end up, but you can see that it's going somewhere. Something is happening. I always think, had I not been a writer, I'm sure I would have become a shrink, because people are so interesting to me, and the depth of people's thinking and obsessive, fixated thinking is very, very intriguing to me. It's like the Oliver Sacks, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. That kind of stuff is very interesting to me when somebody has a premise around which they form their life that is so bizarre. But there's a total logic to it. My mother had a patient who couldn't be touched. I don't know the reasoning for that, but I can certainly see a story about that.
Yes.
You can imagine kind of simple reasons why that might have been the case, that there was some damage along the way.
Yeah.
Emotionally, but there may be another reason, which has to do with, the way I would do it is that they're afraid to touch the things that are going to touch them. It's not about intimacy. It's about the world being so filled with poisons. I wrote. In fact, I think I ended up writing a story about a guy like that who couldn't touch anything, and he hired a prostitute who would touch things and describe them to him. That was his particular. It wasn't a fetish. It was a psychological hunger, and that's how he satisfied it. It was that's how he had his sensual needs met, that he would have somebody else describe what things felt like, describe what it felt like to drink a glass of water, describe what it felt like to hold a pencil in your hand, all these kinds of things.
Uh-huh. Well, why a prostitute? Just because,
because I thought a
just hire
prostitute
them?
would be a person who would be in service and would agree to whatever the request was, and would have the in the case of this particular prostitute was a very perceptive and very observant person, so that they, for 1 hour, the task of this customer, if you will, was to describe everything. That was the task. So touch is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can tackle what we take in and what we give off through touch.
Yeah. That totally sounds like something that you would explore and put your own kind of either signature twist on it, or just I mean, I see it too as like being revealing to the reader, right? As far as our own our own quirks, right? As far as like the things that we become obsessed by, right? And I know that you like exploring that, like if someone becomes obsessed with running, or where it's like, what is that fulfilling for someone?
Yeah,
right?
and it's like Greek mythology. It's a great forum to explore other things. I mean, one of the stories in Zoopraxis is called The Talking Man, as you know, and it's about a guy who's born talking.
Yeah.
And he never stops talking, and it's just one sentence. It's not even punctuated, and that there are ideas, countless ideas that are integrated in this endless sentence, and people begin to kind of be drawn to him, and they isolate different phrases, and they think, well, that he's speaking to me, or this is what he really means. And it's a whole sort of study of the subjectivity of belief, and it's interesting as a writer to hear back from people what you've done that has touched them in different ways. I have a very good friend, Larry Meyer, who lives up in Oregon, and we were just talking the other night about different things that he's read of mine and things that he's seen, and it's very interesting to me to know how the things that I've done have struck people, and they may have struck them in ways different than even what my original intent was.
But do you go? I mean, do you bake that into the cake as far as like your intent? It's like, I want someone to, exactly, come out with this idea about why I wrote this, or because I can see too where there's just especially with your newer stories, from this collection from Zoopraxis, that there are less of the gotcha endings.
Yeah, I think so too, and I attribute it to some degree to my father's passing 3 years ago. That it somehow it just takes you into a different emotional phase of your life. That you just begin to see things and feel things as much as you may have before, even more so. And that ideas of loss certainly become premier in your mind, and so there's a certain streak of melancholy, I think, with some of the stories. There's a feeling that we're all heading toward different horizons, but a horizon, and I think that's I I like also the finding an ambiguity in a story, so that when the 10 people that read it might get 10 different things out of it, and they usually do actually. With those kinds of stories, they do. When it's a more kind of mechanical ending, if you will.
Right. Or it's all well choreographed and just like
the idea
laid
that
out.
everybody should get it the same way. But these stories are more, they're more interpretable. I think they're like Rorschachs. And so I'm interested to see how people take to these stories, because they are not all of them. Some of them are very much they come at you, and then they really there is a payoff that is much more, I think, startling. But the ones that are more open-ended, I'm interested to see how people respond to that.
Yeah, it's like when I do an Om album, it's just like done to create a space for someone
Yeah, that's different than writing a song.
To put in to their, they'll put their interpretation, in there. They'll make it part of their journey, and all. And yeah, a song can be a little bit more storytelling, and it's like you're looking for a specific response. If it's like a sad ending or a happy ending, whatever. If you just want people to get up and dance.
Well, the minute you include lyrics, it changes it. It changes the whole thing. I remember when MTV first started on the air, there was such a kind of an outcry, because prior to that, there were really very few examples of the songs that we loved being visually interpreted.
Yeah. I had a problem with it. You could go back to A Hard Day's
Night, or you could go back. I mean, there were things along the way where you could go, well, what about this? What about this? But it was so systemic that all these songs had now found a visual kind of, their visual version, and people didn't like it. They liked it, but they also kind of resented it. Like
I fought it.
It was an imposed version,
Yeah. The beauty of music is that, you can use it as the background to your life. It's like your life is the visual, right? And the artist was like, just kind of like, just having fun, You'd have all these band members that, I want to be an actor too. So where will Zoopraxis be in the future, as far as how can people get a hold of it? Get their copy. Yeah.
Go to Gauntlet Press.com. It's either Gauntlet.com or GauntletPress.com.
GUANT. GAU.
Yeah, GAUNTLET, Gauntlet. And they can order directly. And the book should be out, I would think, in a couple of months now. We should be going to the printer next week, actually.
Beautiful.
So, whatever amount of time that takes now.
It's just overnight, right? To print a book.
It may be.
Hardcover.
The last book, actually, one of the books that you and I did together, it was printed in China. And I remember it took forever, and I finally understood the phrase "a slow boat from China." It took months and months and months, and because China at the time, I don't know if it's true now, but this was, 4 years ago or something. The cost of publishing in China was very low compared to publishing here.
Yeah.
But I think there's been such a revolution in publishing and in self-publishing that books can be printed in, like print on demand. I mean, you can get a book, like you said, it's literally can be done overnight.
So the hardcover version is coming out first. Get that at Gauntlet.
Yes, and
GauntletPress.com.
Yeah, and then we'll have other versions of it down the line. But
get the hardcover, because it has the art in it. It has like you'll sign it, right? You'll have signed copies and all that, collector's copies.
Absolutely. And it's also there's for people who follow this whole world, we have an introduction by John Shirley, the great John Shirley, who's among his many fine works. It's The Crow, and also Chet Williamson, who's just a remarkable, gifted writer.
Fantastic.
Forward, and it's
Fantastic.
It's just beautiful. I mean, and with Harry's artwork in it, it's definitely worth getting the hardcover, I think.
Thank you, Richard. Our time is up.
Wow, that flew.
That flew by.
It did.
Much love to you.
You too, pal.
And have thank you so much for
oh, it's my pleasure. Have a lovely day, and I'll talk to you soon.
And everyone, thank you for listening. And listen next week. We'll be back here with Tara and Tara Sutphen's Transformations. Many blessings. Bye.